My father wanted to make governor's residence a home, just not a mansion.
I had dates that would come to the front door, and as soon as they were met by a uniformed highway patrolman, get in the car and leave. Yeah, you were in a fishbowl.
We'd play football inside the formal dining areas and the foyer and what have you. Fortunately, the home has survived well. A few panes in the chandeliers have not lived as long as I have.
The things happen, it's just like everyone else's home. The roof will leak, water goes off time to time. So I accepted it as just very nice public housing, and I enjoyed it very much.
In the spring of 1930, construction began on a grand Georgian country house situated on 10 acres of land just off Franklin Road. The architect was Beaux-Arts-trained Russell Hart, who had come to Nashville around 1908 to oversee construction of the Hermitage Hotel and found the city to his liking. When he won the contract for the permanent restoration of the Parthenon in 1920, his reputation was assured. His client was William Ridley Wills, one of the founders of the National Life and Accident Insurance Company. People must have wondered why a man well into middle age, with grown children, would be building a house with 16 rooms in the middle of the Great Depression.
I think he was in a manic state of mind. He was bipolar, although they had not diagnosed it back then. And he didn't have any particular interest in building a huge house, but National Life stock had just gone public, and he had, for the first time in his life, a considerable amount of money. And his wife, my grandmother, must have wanted the house. So he built it for her, even though both of his children were grown. One was already married, and the other child, my father, would soon marry.
His son, Jesse, named the house Far Hills because its view took in the rolling hills once belonging to the estate of John Overton. With its brick and stone exterior, Far Hills was built to last. Totally fireproof, with a slate roof, thick concrete and plaster walls, a marble entrance hall, and a suspended stone staircase.
I can remember riding on roller skates across that marble, but as a child I was aware that it was a very, very handsome house, and the gardens were just as elaborate. There was a very elaborate rose garden with climbing roses, and the land was very rich, so everything was elaborate, including the garage, which had a stable behind it.
This home, fit for a governor, would not become the official Tennessee governor's residence for nearly 20 years. Tennessee governors had either lived at home or stayed in hotels until 1907, when the state acquired a large Victorian mansion near Capitol Hill. When it was demolished in the early 20s to make way for the War Memorial Building, the state leased and then purchased a substantial 4-square house on West End Avenue. During Governor James Nance McCord's administration in the mid-40s, the West End neighborhood went commercial. The legislature authorized McCord to seek a new official residence, but no action was taken until the election of Gordon Browning. Gordon Browning, a plain-spoken West Tennessee farmer, had been governor before in the late 1930s. A fiscal conservative, he feared that people might run him out of the state if he spent a lot of money on the governor's residence. When attorney Jack Norman, one of Browning's close advisors, saw an ad in the paper listing Far Hills at only $125,000, Norman insisted that the governor take a look at it. Browning knew that his wife, Ida Leach, to whom he had been married for 28 years, was more than ready for a home with modern conveniences. So the governor sat down and negotiated with Jesse Wills, who had power of attorney for his father.
My father agreed to reduce the price from $125,000 to $120,000 and to additionally give the state of Tennessee all of the furnishings. So they lost on the deal, but he wanted it in time so that when he was inaugurated, he would have that house to move into, so we wouldn't have to move twice. And so he was able to move in it when he was inaugurated governor.
Although the 6-foot-tall Browning was an avid sportsman, he was known to be a suave campaigner, a persuasive orator, and even a crooner.
I was waltzing with my darling to the Tennessee waltz when an old friend I happened to see.
During the 1948 campaign, one of his opponents had been country music star Roy Acuff, who heard Browning's rendition of the state song and graciously volunteered to cut him a record. In that election, Browning wrestled the Democratic Party away from Memphis political kingpin Boss Crump. Browning became a voice for rural Tennessee, improving roads and schools, and managing to overturn the discriminatory poll tax once and for all.
They were playing the beautiful Tennessee waltz.
32-year-old Frank Gold Clement from Dixon defeated Gordon Browning in 1952. With the help of his campaign manager, Buford Ellington, he captured the farm vote. To win the state, the Clement campaign relied on Boss Crump and his Democratic machine in Memphis.
In the election of 1952, in the primary in which Governor Clement defeated Governor Browning, he had the support of Mr. Crump. 2 years before Mr. Crump died. Well, after that primary, Governor Clement and Buford Ellington went to Memphis to thank Mr. Crump for his efforts and his help. And as they left Mr. Crump's office on Main and Adams, Mr. Crump said the following to them, something to this effect: "If you boys handle it right, you can hold on to that thing for 15 or 20 years." They held on to it for 18. I always thought that was a delicious story.
Clement came into office eager to make a difference in the lives of everyday Tennesseans. At his inaugural reception at the Hermitage Hotel, the public was invited to attend without tickets. Clement drew a large crowd, nothing new for the captivating speaker who would later be invited by former President Harry S. Truman to give the keynote address at the 1956 Democratic National Convention.
From these halls in Chicago shall go forth sometime this week the candidates of competence and conscience who shall become the next president and the next vice president of the United States of America.
Lucille and Frank Clement made a glamorous couple, drawing media attention wherever they went. But they were determined to stick by their small-town principles. When they moved into the residence with their 3 small boys, the Clements wanted to make the massive brick house a home, and that they did. Lucille balanced official entertaining with family life and tried to place as few restrictions on the children as possible. The house was filled with kids for birthday celebrations and play parties. And Lucille was determined that they should have a swimming pool.
it was a lily pond of sorts, and my mother had them take the lilies out so that she could throw her boys in. And it was great. In the summertime, we would just have a big time swimming and jumping in and what have you. Even though it wasn't deep, it was wet and cool.
Lucille and Frank allowed the children and their menagerie of pets free run of the grounds.
My father always said the only scandal in his administration were his 3 boys. And that's probably correct, because we truly had an animal collection there. We had 3 horses, a walking horse named Champ, a pinto named Thunder, and a Shetland pony named Mr. Politics. I had 150 chickens. I sold eggs to the state employees and others. I didn't even have to deliver them. They'd come out there and buy them. And then we had 2 goats, and we had a wagon, and we'd hitch those goats to the wagon. Their names were Pip and Polly. I had 150 guinea pigs, started with 3 guinea pigs in the house, but it got to be so many I had to move them to the backyard. And then I had 1 monkey, or really my brother Frank had the monkey, and he fed him too much candy and it died. But we really had a real farm operation there. And I wanted to have some hogs, but my mother rejected that. They didn't think the neighbors would like that too much.
Governor Clement loved music, especially country music. His campaigns were studded with stars who volunteered to perform for free. And the Tennessee plowboy, Eddie Arnold, was among his closest friends. The governor had heard that the Tennessee State Penitentiary had an a cappella singing group modeled after the Jordanaires, Elvis Presley's backup singers. They were called the Prisonaires, and their leader was Johnny Bragg.
They were quite something, and we never had any problems with them. They were always gentlemen. But Dad enjoyed having them out there and to tell their story about their life and where they went wrong. And they were very open about it, too, and in my opinion, very honest about it.
With the governor's permission, the Prisonaires were able to cut several records at Sun Studios in Memphis. Johnny Bragg co-wrote Just Walking in the Rain, which became a 1956 hit for singer Johnny Ray. When he left office after his 2nd term, Clement pardoned Bragg. When Frank Clement was re-elected for a 3rd term in 1962, it was at the height of the civil rights movement. Clement refused to stand with other Southern governors against integration.
My father had unbelievable political courage and vision, and I think that's what separates Frank Clement from many other politicians and public servants, that he was willing to put his political future and career on the line for Tennessee to move Tennessee forward.
And Clement kept Tennessee in the national spotlight. In the spring of 1963, President John F. Kennedy came to Nashville to give a speech at Vanderbilt University. Afterwards, he was invited to the governor's residence for lunch.
I remember him coming to the house, a very wonderful gentleman. I also remember he had long eyelashes. Why I remember that, I don't know, but I was shorter than he, and you look up to someone and I see these big eyelashes. Maybe that's what the women found so attractive about him, I don't know. But he was very charming, and they had lunch in the residence. The unusual part of it is that they had lunch upstairs, which is the private residence area, and they literally moved the furniture and the bed and what have you out of my parents' primary bedroom and made a lunchroom out of it. They put 4 or 5 round tables in there for a private luncheon.
Frank Clement died in an automobile accident in 1969. His funeral was held in Dixon, Tennessee.
It was unbelievable. It was over 10,000 people there. And he would have loved to have made that speech, too. But you know, all of Dad's political rallies, there were huge crowds. I mean, today you're lucky to get 100 people to show up. And we had thousands of people that would show up every time he'd make a political talk in 1962, and you can't get those kind of crowds today. But even at his funeral, I mean, he was able to draw a crowd, and people came from everywhere because they loved Frank Clement, what he stood for, and he was one of the greatest orators that Tennessee's ever produced.
When Frank Clement was prohibited by law from holding the governor's office for more than 2 terms running, his former campaign manager, Buford Ellington, succeeded him. Twice, in fact.
For 18 years, Frank Clement and Buford Ellington were governors of Tennessee. And the Tennessean, who didn't support either one of them, called it leapfrog government. But my father and Buford Ellington both played on those terms for their good and trying to win again, which they both did. And they ran the state for 18 years.
Ellington, originally from Mississippi, was a farmer in Marshall County, Tennessee. A former state legislator, his strong work ethic, common sense, and straight talk held great appeal for Tennesseans.
He knew the route that he wanted to take, and I've heard him say a million times, you know, you may not like what I say, but you know if I say it, I mean it. And that's kind of where that "a man of his word," which was one of his campaign slogans, came from.
Ellington was married to the former Catherine Cheek of Marshall County. They had 2 children, Ann, who was just finishing high school when the family moved into the residence, and Earl, who was away in the Army.
They never lost their common touch, if I can use that phrase. They were what they'd always been, people from a rural background, small towns, and always just as nice and considerate and dear as anybody could be. I never knew a finer lady than Mrs. Ellington.
Catherine Ellington, a creative homemaker, wanted the residence to be a comfortable home and an appropriate backdrop for state functions. After 10 years of occupancy, 6 with the small Clement boys, the house needed a major going over. Fresh coats of paint and new carpets were added, but most of the elegant furnishings from Far Hills were retained, including a landscape mural at the top of the stairs.
It was very important that it be kept because it did belong to the people of Tennessee. It is their home, so it should be kept up in such a manner.
The Ellingtons entertained a wide variety of guests, including Senator and Mrs. John F. Kennedy, and Elvis Presley when he came to speak before the state legislature. Before the speech, the governor invited Elvis to his office to introduce him to his daughter Ann. She caught his eye, and when the sergeant at arms summoned Elvis to the House chamber, he insisted she come with him.
And so he grabbed my hand and off we went. And here's everybody. I've never seen so many people. And of course, flash bulbs, that's dating myself a bit, but flash bulbs were going off like crazy, you know, and everybody was reaching out to him. People were screaming and hollering. It almost got frightening in a way because there was such a pack of people there. So up the steps we went with all this group behind us coming, the Jordanaires and everything, and we get inside and it's just wall-to-wall humanity.
That afternoon, Elvis whisked Ann out to the state penitentiary. She waited in the car while he visited the prisoners. And by the time he dropped her off at the residence, something was different.
He brought me home. He brought me home, and I think that was kind of where our relationship began. And we dated for about 1.5 years. And nobody seemingly knew about it. Although many people did, nobody ever said anything, and nobody ever questioned me about it until these many years after his death.
In between terms, Buford Ellington went to work for President Lyndon Johnson a longtime ally. When Ellington returned to office in 1967, he and Catherine were honored to host the President and First Lady on a visit to the Hermitage for Andrew Jackson's 200th birthday, and afterwards at a formal reception at the executive residence. The following year, the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated in Memphis. Repercussions were also felt in Nashville. Nothing at the executive residence would ever be the same.
We had to close all of the draperies. We were forbidden to go near the windows. It was a horrible time for everybody.
When protesters came up into the yard of the residence, Governor Ellington decided that the house would ultimately need some sort of protective barrier. Buford Ellington left office as one of Tennessee's most popular governors. He would ultimately be commemorated by a parkway, an agricultural center, and a small local airport. But his departure would also signal an end to Democratic dominance of gubernatorial politics in Tennessee. Winfield Dunn, a Memphis dentist, would be Tennessee's first Republican governor in 50 years. On January 16, 1971, the inaugural platform was loaded with over 200 people as he took the oath of office. Dunn's inaugural speech called for partnership, not partisanship, and they celebrated in style. The Dunns had moved into the residence several days before the inauguration, a courtesy extended by the Ellingtons, which has since become a tradition. Governor-elect Dunn, heeding the advice of his predecessor, decided it was time to install a security fence.
Some people like to say that Republican Governor Dunn put that fence up just to keep Minnie Pearl's chickens out of his yard. That wasn't exactly the case, but it was a good move. The fence was attractive. Betty Dunn, my wife, had a considerable input on its appearance, so it turned out very well.
The day after the inauguration, the Dunns held an open house. Betty, in particular, wanted to give their statewide supporters a chance to see the first family's home.
There were 6,000 people who came on that Sunday and came through and shook hands. And I decided that they needed to go upstairs, so we had it figured so they could go up one side of the staircase and then they would come back down, and we had hot spiced tea for them when they came down. And Winfield and I were in the state drawing room shaking hands, and I heard this horrific sound coming down the hall, those high ceilings. It was just the biggest racket you've ever heard. Well, I just couldn't stand it. I said, stop, I've got to find out what it is. And I went down the hall, and here was my little girl, Julie, dressed in her cute little pinafore with her clackers. And it was awful. It was the worst sound. It didn't take me long to get those away from her, but she was always the little trickster in the governor's residence.
Julie was indeed a live wire. Just the age for spend-the-night parties, homemade movies, and a yard full of animals, including a pet calf given to the governor by the Tennessee Dairy Association.
I used to get a big bottle with the big nipple on it, and I'd feed her, and she just thought, oh, it was great. And she didn't know she was a cow, because she grew up with horses and dogs and rabbits and chickens and cats and a lamb. And so she would follow me around like a dog. I called her Buckalina. When she would run, she'd buck up her heels, kind of like the colt that we lived with and that we had there. And Buckalina was mine, and she used to lay down and put her head in my lap, and I'd scratch her just like a dog, rub her belly. Brought her into the foyer one time. She had a little episode, a little accident in the foyer. My mother just heard about that for the first time today.
Betty Dunn had her own plans for her grand new home's interior. She started a foundation to raise funds for the acquisition of fine antiques. With a major donor in tow, she traveled to Washington for the auction of a rare portrait of Andrew Jackson. She had no idea that she would be bidding against a high-powered collector.
I jumped up and was so excited. You know, auctions, those auction houses are really quiet. Well, the whole house broke into applause. They knew that this lady, they didn't know who I was, but they knew I was really excited about it. So this handsome gentleman came up to me and he said, "You are Mrs. Dunn, aren't you, from Tennessee?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Well, I'm Clem Conger, the White House curator, and I really wanted that for the White House, but I'm glad you're taking him back to Tennessee."
More and more, the handsomely furnished residence was becoming an important place for the governor to entertain fellow politicians and business people he was trying to recruit into the state. On the personal side, the Dunns enjoyed a circle of friends that included next-door neighbor Minnie Pearl. Some evenings, Winfield and Minnie would pass the musical hat.
She couldn't play very well. I couldn't sing very well, but we could both try. And we would get in there and just try to outdo each other, remembering the words to songs that were in our past years. Such fun times.
And the fun continued when Betty's idol, Burt Reynolds, came to Nashville to film his television show.
Oh, Burt Reynolds. Well, I just thought he was so handsome and so much fun. And he was dating Dinah Shore, and she was from Nashville.
Would you look at this place?
From the governor's mansion in Nashville, Tennessee, it's the Burt Reynolds Late Show.
Probably one of the most unusual nights was when a gentleman named Burt Reynolds decided he liked the residence so well that he wanted to come back and do one of his special one-hour shows from the Tennessee governor's residence. The program unfolded with Burt coming to the residence, standing at the door after greeting Betty and me, and then welcoming in the most incredible arrangement of country music superstars you ever saw.
I have to say, of course I love Minnie, but my favorite had to be Dolly Parton. She was so special. I just loved her. We were sitting in the bathroom getting our makeup on, and she said, "Now you just may think I'm not nice because I've got all this hair and this makeup, but I'm really a nice person." And she was so adorable, and we just had a wonderful time.
But executive residence hijinks weighed in the balance against hard decisions, such as the traditional request for clemency by prisoners who worked for the First Family.
I couldn't afford personally to feel that I'd given special treatment to those people based on their kind service to us, even though I would have loved to have done it. Where I could, because of their good conduct, I was able to reduce the sentence of a number of them. But to sit there, as I did that morning just before I left office, and to talk to each one of them individually, it was heartbreaking. Tears would come to their eyes. That happened 2 or 3 times when I said, "I just simply can't do what you think I'm supposed to do." That had to be one of the most heart-wrenching times that I spent in the governor's residence. But that's just the way it was.
The first Republican governor in 50 years, limited by statute to 1 4-year term, left office justly proud of his accomplishments, having reorganized state government, pushed economic development, and created a solid infrastructure for public education. In the aftermath of the Watergate scandal, Tennesseans seeking a return to grassroots politics brought former West Tennessee Congressman Ray Blanton into the State House. His supporters came from all parts of the state. A long line stretched around the property for his inaugural open house. Moving into the residence was quite an adjustment for Betty Blanton, their 2 grown children, Debbie and David, and their young son, Paul, with the prison trustees and state troopers constantly on the premises.
I used to worry because they had certain hours,
And I thought I had to go somewhere between that time period. And they would fuss. They said, Miss Blanton, that doesn't matter. Well, whatever you want to do, you know. So, but they didn't want us to drive or anything like that. But we did that one time. It's kind of hard to buy personal items at a store with somebody looking at you.
One of her challenges was to make a home out of the large house that by now was starting to show its age.
We had mold in all the radiators, and that's when my allergies started kicking in real bad. And it was the coldest house I've ever lived in because there were no storm windows, and the air would just really be bad in the winter months.
As governor, Ray Blanton did much to promote the state, recognizing Tennessee artists, founding the state's Department of Tourism, and traveling widely to recruit foreign industry. In a stroke of entrepreneurial genius, Blanton worked with business leaders to sponsor a day-long trip to Tennessee for foreign ambassadors to the United Nations in the summer of 1976. UN Secretary General Kurt Waldheim and his family came a day early, toured the grounds, and spent a night at the residence. It was a beautiful June day, so after lunch, Governor Blanton took them to Shelbyville, where Waldheim and his daughter Krista mounted Tennessee walking horses. On Monday, the delegates arrived to a real Tennessee welcome.
That was the first time the UN, as a delegation, had gone out of the state, out of New York, to a state. And as far as I know, the last time that they were out as a delegation. So we felt quite honored that they did that.
A year later, there were rumblings of impropriety in the Blanton administration concerning the early commutation of prison sentences. Although Tennessee governors were now allowed 2 successive 4-year terms, Blanton decided not to run for a second term.
That information, taken with other information of the last several weeks, causes each of us to believe that it is in the best interest of the people of Tennessee for the governor-elect to assume that office immediately.
Despite his many accomplishments for the state of Tennessee, Ray Blanton left office under a cloud of suspicion. In 1978, Republican Lamar Alexander walked across the state wearing a red-checked flannel shirt to show the people of Tennessee he was a regular guy who understood their concerns. He entertained at rallies with a washboard band and played up his East Tennessee roots. Underneath the folksy image, this son of 2 school teachers was an astute politician with a brilliant legal mind. Tennesseans looking forward to a new era of leadership swarmed into Nashville for his inauguration and celebration.
I can remember on that first weekend standing out in the back after the several thousand visitors had left, or the last of them, and it was late in the afternoon, and there was snow all around. It's very peaceful, very beautiful, and the tour buses were slowing down in front of the governor's mansion. I looked down the hill and I said, honey, isn't that nice how their tour buses are slowing down so they can see the governor's mansion? And honey looked up at me and said, Lamar, she said, they're slowing down in front of the governor's mansion so they can stop in front of Minnie Pearl's house next door.
Honey Alexander was going to need that sense of humor to help her juggle the roles of young mother and first lady.
Well, when we moved in, I really viewed the opportunity in 2 different ways. One was we did have a young family. They were 9, 6, and 4. And I was pregnant with our 4th. And I really wanted to make it a home, which also conflicted with the other idea that I had of being in that wonderful place. And that was that we were really stewards of it. And we wanted to open it up to the people of Tennessee, and we wanted it to represent Tennessee and Tennesseans. So it was a balancing act, and we took the 2nd and 3rd floor and really made them into the private quarters. at the executive residence, and then tried to showcase Tennessee things on the first floor and outside.
The Alexanders tried to keep things as normal as possible for the children. They entertained informally at home, hosting birthdays, sleepovers, and pool parties, and made a cozy family living space upstairs. The rule was that as long as the children would make themselves presentable and talk to the guests, they were always welcome downstairs for official functions.
And I can remember when Will was 18 months old. He was supposed to have 50 words. And I sort of sat down and I thought through all of his words. I think 30 of them were people's names, because that's what he knew the most about was all these people who were around all the time, whether it was governor's staff people or the resident staff or the highway patrolmen, his sisters. He was just always with people, and so his words were all people's names. And he's sort of like that today.
Honey and Lamar Alexander decided to change some of the long-standing practices at the residence.
We didn't think it was a good idea for our children to grow up with prisoners working in the house, so to speak, and that's where we lived. And our new Commissioner of Corrections, Mr. Bradley, didn't think it was good prison policy to have them working there either, because there was a tradition that if they behaved themselves, these former murderers, the governor would pardon them when he left office. And we thought that it was better to have an executive clemency system based on something else than serving breakfast to the governor over a period of time.
They moved the state trooper's desk out of the front hall to give the house a more inviting feel. Then they began to consider the furnishings.
The house was pretty threadbare when we moved in. It was solid. It didn't need any major renovations, but it needed a lot of decorating. And so one of the first things I did after we got settled was call Tish Hooker, whose husband had run for governor, John Jay, and I think they wanted to be governor and first lady much more than I did, that's for sure. And I felt that she would really be interested in helping make it a beautiful place.
Tish had been raised in a similarly palatial Nashville home. Having grown up with Ridley Will's granddaughter, she was already familiar with Far Hills.
As an interior designer, whenever you start a project, you have to have a focus. And of course, the focus was to make it look as little as possible like it did when I went in. Because I think the state had gotten a really good price on some green paint many, many years ago. Everything was this pale green paint. And not only did they paint the walls that color, but they covered up the beautiful floors with this matching green carpet. One place it was in the front hall. Under there were gorgeous black and white marble floors. Then we went through the rest of the downstairs, and of course we came across beautiful hardwood floors. And then there's a sunroom there, which is probably my favorite room in the house because I love a lot of sunlight. And then once this carpet was up, it revealed this knockout tile floor that made you think you was somewhere in Morocco or southern Italy or somewhere. It's just fabulous.
Playing off the black and white floors, Tish and her partner Jay Turman chose pinkish-brown terracotta colors. In order to save money, existing furniture was reupholstered and the fine antiques showcased. The Tennessee theme was carried out in the needlepoint dining room chairs. And in the living room, where custom wallpaper with native birds and flowers gave the room a light and airy feel. The Alexanders were honored when the end results were featured in a full-color spread in Architectural Digest. With the house now a showplace, the Alexanders welcomed dignitaries and business associates in style.
A lot of Japanese visitors came to the governor's mansion when we were there, because Japan was just beginning to invest outside of Japan, and it was an opportunity for some place in the United States to get those big plants. And Tennessee got a
disproportionate number of them because we're centrally located, and because we had a good workforce, but also because we welcomed the Japanese to our state.
Alexander wooed Japanese executives with country music. Chet Atkins performed house concerts. And he brought out Japanese favorite, Brenda Lee. Lamar Alexander succeeded in bringing Nissan's first American automobile plant to Tennessee. And as the first Tennessee governor to have 2 successive 4-year terms, he was able to accomplish a great deal, establishing a master teacher program for public schools and fostering small-town pride and cultural tourism with his Homecoming '86 initiative.
I have one more statement to make. I promised you I would be a first-day governor. Ladies and gentlemen, swear me in at 10 o'clock in the morning. Give me a cup of coffee and 4 vanilla wafers, and I'll be ready to go to work. Thank you.
Ned Ray McWhirter, a popular West Tennessee Democrat and self-made businessman, served in the state legislature for 18 years before being elected to the governorship. On inaugural day, thousands came out in the rain. At the reception at the residence, they trooped through the house sopping wet. Because he was a bachelor, he brought his mother, Lucille Golden Smith McWhirter, to be First Lady.
My mother was a wonderful lady, and I obviously loved her very much. And the last word she said to me, I was holding her hand at the hospital bed, and when she passed away, she looked up, and the prettiest smile I'd ever seen on her face. She said, "Now I got you elected, behave yourself." Very, very appropriate. That was my mother.
When McWhirter saw his home-to-be for the first time, he realized the upstairs was in need of refurbishing. A bipartisan group of Tennesseans contributed funds to update the decor. But some long-standing maintenance problems would be too costly. When faced with the price tag of $500,000 for a new slate roof, the governor told state architect Mike Fitz he'd just put out more buckets.
Actually, one night it leaked on my bed. I went up there to go to bed and go to sleep, and I was tired as the devil, and my bed was wet, so I went over and checked in the Red Roof Inn across the road from the residence. And they all lost me that next morning. They couldn't find me.
Other times, he slipped out, with the only purpose being just to get away for a while.
One Sunday afternoon, I was driving down at Brentwood and came back to Radnor Lake and came on back to the residence and pulled up the gate. And, they usually see you on the camera and didn't open. And I heard a voice say, "Who is this?" And I said, "I will open the gate, I want in." And he said, "Well, who is this?" And I said, "Well," he said, "Do you want to see the governor?" And I said, No, I am the governor. In fact, I might have embellished it a little bit when I said it. I said, "I am the governor." And he said, oh, excuse me. And then the gates opened. It looked like I hope the pearly gates open that way someday. They look great. So I just like to live as normal of a life as you can.
And he shared that exuberance with everyone around him, especially his neighbor and good friend, Sarah Cannon.
Minnie Pearl was just Minnie Pearl to all governors, and Democrats, Republicans, made no difference. I didn't play tennis with her, but I'd occasionally have a nightcap with her, so she liked that, I think, better than tennis.
Fun-loving as he was, McWhirter was serious about the state's business. His administration won national recognition for fiscal responsibility and sound management. He looked after the needs of Tennesseans by pushing forward an ambitious 21st Century Schools program, promoting Tennessee to industry, and addressing indigent health care.
I left office a right happy man, pleased, still pleased to this day.
Don Sundquist, the first member of his family to graduate from either high school or college, served 6 terms in Congress before winning Tennessee's governorship in 1994. He came in on a solid conservative platform of reducing welfare and promoting efficiency in government. After the exciting inaugural day, the Sundquists were initially overwhelmed by their new residents.
I told Martha, I said, this is after the election, after the inaugural, I said, I'm afraid somebody's going to come up these stairs and say, what are you doing here? Get out of here. But it finally settles in that it's you're the caretaker of this, and you'll be a resident of this place for 4 years. And in our case, we were blessed to have 8 years. And it's a wonderful place. I loved it. It was an absolute privilege to live there.
When we first drove in the driveway as newly elected governor and first lady, and those gates closed behind us, you kind of wondered if they were locking you in or locking the world out. So it took a while before it got to feel where you could find a spot that you felt comfortable in.
It wouldn't be long until the Sundquists settled in and each discovered their favorite part of the residence.
My favorite part of the house was the yard. It was nice to have 10 acres. We had a full-time horticulturist who had an assistant. We had inmates that did all the yard work, so all I had to do was enjoy the yard. We did put in a rose garden, which was beautiful. We had 180 rose bushes. I put in a lot of water lilies in the reflecting pool, because I love water lilies. And Sunday afternoon, we never had help on weekends. Weekends were our quiet time. So on weekends, I would go out and put on my bathing suit and get in the lily pond and trim the lilies and play around with the fish and just enjoy life and not have to worry about anybody coming in.
I stayed in the governor's office downstairs. Some governors don't use that office. I did. And it's small, fireplace, a little TV, computer, knotty pine walls. You can open up the shutters and look out the front. I would stay there every night till 9 or 10 virtually, because you get a chance to get caught up on paperwork, return phone calls, and it was my favorite room of the house.
Since the Sundquist children were grown, Don and Martha decided to create the position of first dog.
The first dog we had at the residence was Bailey. And a lady at the restaurant across the interstate said she was going back to England. Her husband was a songwriter. And we asked about the dog because the dog was outside. And she said, well, I'll give him to you. And I said, is it yours? And said, yeah, it's ours. We feed it. And sometimes on cold nights, it hangs around the restaurant. We take the dog home and put it inside. So we took Bailey home. It was a great dog.
When a local television news story featuring Bailey prompted a woman to call claiming the dog belonged to her son, the Sundquist had no choice but to let Bailey go. They went to the Humane Society and brought Ruby and Millie home to become the official residence dogs. Now the residence really felt like a home, and the Sundquist opened it up to a wide variety of guests. They entertained former First families during Tennessee's bicentennial, hosted annual Scandinavian Santa Lucia Days, feted country music stars, and promoted Tennessee's unique culture to a wide variety of state guests. After 8 years, Don and Martha Sundquist were well aware that the house was showing its age and in need of major repair.
We were having a reception, and people were coming down to the sunroom and then coming up past in a receiving line into the living room and then back to the hallway. And I glanced down behind me, and there was this awful oozing material coming toward me and on the carpet. And it had 55 heating and air conditioning units in the house, all connected with hot water in some manner. And one of them had sprung a leak, and this stuff was coming out. So we just stepped forward a little bit and put some things down over it. But that's the kind of problem you have with an older house. The roof leaked regularly. It does need the kind of repair that I believe is going to happen in the next few years to preserve it.
Don and I are very excited that a lot of the changes that we saw were needed at the governor's residence will be being made now. And it's a perfect opportunity with Governor Bredesen and his wife having their own home there. I'm glad to see that these changes will be made, and it's a perfect time to do that.
Don Sundquist's greatest challenge was the state's financial health. During his 2 terms in office, Tennessee did succeed in taking a large number of people off the welfare rolls, but his proposal for a state income tax was defeated. Sundquist managed to enhance state natural areas by donations from private industry, acquiring the right-of-way for the Cumberland Trail, and creating a new state forest at the eastern end of the state. Harvard-educated Phil Bredesen, a successful healthcare executive and 2-term mayor of Nashville, brought sound management skills to Tennessee during a time of fiscal crisis. A creative leader, he quickly accomplished a balanced state budget with across-the-board cooperation from all agencies. Job recruitment, enhanced public school teacher pay, and the implementation of a statewide lottery for education were other immediate priorities. But another, more personal initiative would not be far behind.
When Andrew and I talked about this, in some ways it's easier to take a bulldozer and start over again or to go to some new location. But this is it's a beautiful home, and it's emblematic of a period in Tennessee's history. And I think it's very important to preserve those things and figure out ways to reuse them. It's not the 1930s anymore, but we can take a jewel from that period and fix it and change it a little bit and reuse it and make it work in the 21st century.
Artist Charles Brindley, commissioned by the governor and First Lady, has been working for over a year meticulously drawing interior and exterior views of the Tennessee residence. He waits patiently to capture the details of light playing over brick and stone surfaces and feels the slow breath of majestic old trees. Like the disciplined practice of artist Charles Brindley, the painstaking work of bringing one of Nashville's finest homes back to structural and architectural health is notable and praiseworthy. State architect Mike Fitz, well aware of the condition of the residence, has been waiting for this moment for quite a while. Fitz identified the roof as the most urgent priority. The governor and First Lady donated their excess inaugural funds to tearing off the 70-year-old slate roof and replacing it with slate that had the identical colors and tones of the original. The next order of business was to draw up a master plan for restoring the house itself. Rex Garton is the project architect. He's an associate at Hart Freeland Roberts, the firm founded in 1920 by Russell Hart. Preparing the residence for the 21st century while preserving its historical integrity presents unique challenges.
You see the new hardware that matches the original hardware as close as we possibly could. What you may not possibly be able to see on the camera is that we have insulated glazing in here, and these windows are very tight. So we've improved the air infiltration, we've improved the infrared and the UV infiltration into the residence.
Restoring the windows is a critical part of making the house as energy efficient as possible. Phase 1 of the master plan calls for a complete replacement of the mechanical and electrical systems and handicapped accessibility.
I get concerned about the limestone, just the color of it, and if we can get the rest of that green.
First Lady Andrea Conte is playing a primary role in overseeing construction and raising the necessary funds from private sources.
We formed a finance committee that's statewide, it's bipartisan, and really party affiliation was not a consideration for people serving on this committee. They were happy to step up and help, just because any person in Tennessee has to realize that one day it might be them, it might be their daughter, their son, their grandson, their granddaughter, who one day is sitting in the governor's chair. And we're just getting this ready for them.
Sherry Warner Hunter, an artist from Bell Buckle, is creating a 9-foot mosaic sculpture out of slate that was discarded from the original roof. Making a work of art out of the waste material was First Lady Andrea Conte's idea. Hunter won a competition sponsored by the Tennessee Arts Commission with her piece, The Gift, which will honor those who have made possible the restoration of the residence.
The idea is that the hands are outstretched in
a motion to both receive gifts, or the gift could be in the process of being given. In that sense, the bird either looks like it's just landed or it's just ready to take flight.
The preservation of the residence is a special gift to the people of Tennessee and a point of pride for future administrations. The planning alone has taken over 2 years. The entire renovation will require several more years. The complete master plan includes a conservatory where large groups can convene, a restored carriage house for guests, and a futuristic geothermal system that uses the Earth's constant temperature for heating and cooling. Combining classical design elements with progressive ideas in contemporary architecture, the Tennessee residence is truly a vision of the future.
We want people who walk in here, we want them to feel proud they live in Tennessee. I want them to look around and see Tennessee furnishings, Tennessee crafts, Tennessee art, and I want them to walk away feeling very proud that they live in this state. And for people who don't, I want them to come in here and say, gee, I wish I lived in that state.
One of the things that I've experienced here in the residence is just this enormous sense of history and continuity. I mean, to know that when you're sitting in this office working on something, it's, you know, the same place that Elvis came and courted someone, or the Governor Ellington, or Governor Clement, or some people that I've never met and never will. They've long since passed on. It makes you feel a part of the flow of history, and it gives you some perspective on the job. And it's just one of the many things that having a wonderful old residence like that brings to the governors. I know that future governors, when we finish this, will have that same sense of sitting here and really being a part of the flow of history.
This is the First Ladies Luncheon that's been held here at the residence, where we have all of the former First Ladies, and we have descendants of governors who have passed on. And we're all here to be here for lunch to benefit the restoration of this residence.
I never dreamed I would be a doll.